Hi everybody, and welcome back to another video in our 2015 year-end overview. In this video, we're going to talk about the best-selling games of 2015. Now, I don't have all data on all games, so what I'm using here is data that was provided to me from Cool Stuff Inc. You'll know that they are our sponsor for our show, and they are one of the largest, and in my opinion, the best online sellers of board games. They sell hundreds of thousands of games. And so they gave me, we don't have the exact numbers here, but I can tell you 1 through 10 of what games sold the most in terms of units. This isn't how much money they made, but how many of each game sold. It's an interesting list to be sure, so let's get into it. And before we start, we'll say the one game that just missed the list was Time Stories, coming in at 11. By the way, I should also mention that this list is, I'm only including board games, not expansions. There was a couple high-selling expansions like Machikoru Harbor expansion sold very highly, and we're not including anything Star Wars related in the small packs at all, because if we did, the Star Wars X-Wing ships would be really high, the Armada ships and things for Star Wars Imperial Assault, the small blister packs, that stuff would be really high, as well as Magic the Gathering packs and so on. We're talking about straight board games. So, number 10, Roll for the Galaxy. Now, this one came out just at the very beginning of 2015. It had a strong thing going into it because there was already people who love Race for the Galaxy. Roll for the Galaxy has some nice custom dice. I actually am kind of surprised to see that it's this high. I know a lot of people like it, and I'm glad for that. So that's number 10. Number 9 is Splendor. Still going strong. Splendor, the game that did not win the Spiel des Jahres, but still outselling the game that did. Splendor, a game of chips, and just grabbing poker chips and then spending those poker chips to grab different people, then using those people to get discounts on further people and getting points. Very simple concept of the game. I remember when it first came out, everyone was playing it all the time. I still see it being played very often, and obviously a big seller. This game is one of those games that should have won the Spiel des Jahres, I think, because it's just that popular, and, well, we can see that it continues on. Number 8 is Dead of Winter. Now, Dead of Winter came out at the tail end of 2014 and won a lot of awards of 2014, but it really hit distribution in 2015. So we're seeing a lot of people, getting a hold of this game now, and it's really popular, which is really interesting because it's zombies, which does have some popularity, but there's a lot of choices with zombies, and it's a semi-co-op game, which not everyone likes. Only one person may win the game, and it's not a simple game. There's a lot going on in it, and yet it's so popular. I still see it being played. It has replaced for a lot of people Battlestar Galactica and games like that. That's Dead of Winter. Number 7, another game that came out at the end of 2014, that was Alchemist. It came out at Essen 2014, now just hitting the market fully at the beginning of 2015. A game where you needed a smartphone. You don't necessarily need it, but you really do if you want to play properly, where you're using that to scan cards and they tell you if they're in the formula, and you're trying to figure out what the exact formula is. Kind of a deductive game, but a pretty heavy worker placement game. This is one that I'm a little surprised to see on the list just because it's expensive. It's a big game. It's a heavy game. I like playing it, but it's not one that you can just pull out at the whim and play. So that's pretty cool. Number 6, Sushi Go. Now, this is one I'm not surprised it's on the list because it's such a small game, a drafting game where you're just drafting different kinds of sushi, and you want to get the most of this or several of this kind of sushi. A very simple, easy game. I would imagine this one sells well because it fits into a cart. You're trying to get your free shipping by going over a certain amount of money. But I would also imagine that it's just that simple to play because there's lots of small games that could push an order over and be thrown into an order, but not very many small games made these top 10 sellers. Sushi Go did. Number 5, which I suspect would be higher had it come out earlier in the year, is Codenames. Codenames is an amazing party game. It's on many people's top 10 of the year. It's a if you like passwords, then this game has a very similar vibe to that. I think one of the reasons Codenames did so well is not just because it was a great game, but because the price point for this was so reasonably low. to get a game. I mean, essentially the game is just a bunch of cards with words on it, and then some cards with spy pictures on, and some red and blues on squares. It's not really that complex. But the game involved is a game that I think we'll still be talking about 10 years from now. Number 4 is Star Wars Armada. Wow! Folks, this one is a surprise me. I mean, I know the power of Star Wars. But I mean, like, for example, Imperial Assault was number 1 last year, and that one has dropped down. It's still in the top 30 or 40 games, but that one's dropped down. But Armada coming out this year, I didn't know how many people would get it because it was a very high price point to get into. And then the original set of this is good, but you really need a little bit more than that. You need more ships, and that's a pricey thing to stay involved with. And yet it's the power of Star Wars. All right. Number 3, Star Realms. Now, here's another small game like Sushi Go. This one, I believe, was on the list last year. Just a small card game, deck-building style game, and White Wizard just hit gold with this one. It was so easy to play. You're just playing cards against each other. If you like games like Ascension or games like DC Deck Builder, this is the same thing, but it's even faster and more streamlined than those. And it works really well as a 2-player game. You can play with more, but I think it's that 2-player game, and the fact that it's in a small package, and you seemingly get a lot of game for a small price. Number 2 is Sheriff of Nottingham. Now, there may be some bias. I would assume that since the Sheriff of Nottingham is a Dice Tower Essential game, and if people want to, say, oh, Dice Tower, if they listen to Dice Tower, they probably go to Cool Stuff. But I actually know the numbers of Sheriff of Nottingham and how many have sold in total, and it's a pretty big hit. Now, I'm not taking any credit for that Dice Tower Essentials, except for the fact that I found a hit, but Dice Tower, Sheriff of Nottingham is just a great bluffing game, and it's one of those games that I still see being played, and when people play it, they're like, oh, I want to get it. And the price point isn't that high, so I think it does really well. Now, granted, I didn't expect it to be here in the top 10, but can't say I'm too upset. So what's number 1? You might have guessed by now, but I did not expect this game to be as popular, at least in sold units. And this kind of, along with Time Stories, the people are like, oh, no one wants to buy these games that you only have a one-time playthrough. Well, numbers seem to speak differently. Number 1 is Pandemic Legacy. Pandemic Legacy, which is not that cheap of a game, which is a game that has a limited amount of times that you can play it, and yet it's selling like hotcakes. Now, there's 2 versions of it, blue and red. Incidentally, the blue version at Cool Stuff sold better than the red version, although I've heard tales from other stores that the red version did better than the blue, but who knows. But that is intriguing. I mean, the blue version did substantially better than the red version, but I would be curious, to find out from Z-Man which one sold better overall. Pandemic Legacy, I'm telling you, when people play this, they are loving it. Sure, there's a sizable vocal minority who will refuse to ever touch this game, and they vote it down at Board Game Geek, but it really is very highly rated. It provides hours of fun, and I think it's one of the few games that people buy and just keep playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. The game's narrative kind of draws that out of you, and we can see here that the numbers are incredibly high, and it's doing very well. Those are the top 10 selling games, as given to us from data from Cool Stuff, Inc. What did you think? Did anything surprise you there? Was there a game that you're surprised wasn't on the list? Anyhow, I find this sort of thing fascinating. And guys, I thank you for viewing our 2015 coverage. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tom Vasel, and you've been seeing the Dice Tower.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff, Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool Stuff, in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.